Thank you, Sandy. That was a beautiful prelude to our time together today and our service. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Ann O'Dowd, and I'm your service leader today. It's good to be together today on a day that is a time for reflection and a time for looking ahead. This is a Unitarian Universalist space, a place where questions are welcome, where diverse beliefs and backgrounds are celebrated, and where we come together not because we all think the same, but because we choose to walk this path together. As we begin this time and prepare for our annual meeting, which will follow today's service, we are reminded that this congregation is more than a place. It's a community. It is shaped by the generosity, care, and commitment of those who came before us, and by each of us here and now. We give, we serve, and we show up, not for ourselves alone, but for each other and for those who will come after us. So let's begin with gratitude for all we've built together and hope for what is still to come. Please silence your devices if you haven't already done so. It is our custom to extend a special welcome to anyone visiting for the first time or for the first time in a while. So if you are comfortable doing so, please introduce yourself and maybe tell us where you're from and what brought you here. We can start at my right and swing around the room. It's not mandatory. No, it's not mandatory. Just stand or raise your hand or anyone? Wow, there. Oh, hi.
I'm Scott Bosnick. I've been coming to Door County since the 1960s. My parents built a cabin on Ruby Rock. At that time, we were living in Madison during the winters. Now I live in Abington, Illinois during the winters, and I'm friends of Mark again.
Welcome.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, great. Well, welcome everyone. This morning we are honored to welcome a guest speaker whose life and work reflect the very values we cherish as Unitarian Universalists: generosity, shared responsibility, and a deep belief in the power of people coming together for the common good. Brett Becoy is the president and CEO of the Door County Community Foundation, where he helps turn generosity into lasting impact. His influence goes beyond the grants and the programs administered by the foundation. He's a storyteller, a thought leader, and above all, a passionate believer in the idea that strong communities are built not by a few, but by the quiet, consistent contributions of many. You can read more about Brett in the order of service, and you'll hear from him shortly. Please take note of the announcements in the back of your order of service. And at this time, if anyone has any brief announcements related to our community here, you're welcome to stand and share those with the fellowship, and Carl will bring the microphone around. So just raise your hand. No announcements. No. I have one. Oh, and Jamie does too. Go on, Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Hanreddy, a member of the congregation. I would like to encourage everyone to take advantage of the twice-a-month coffee hours that we have on Thursdays, 2 different Thursdays of the month. They are so much fun. I've been to every one. Some have been to 2. Some have only been to 1 so far. We've only had 3 so far. So please do take advantage of it. We try to stick to some really fun topics, things we wouldn't talk about otherwise, which is really great. We really get to know each other very well that way. And so please do take advantage of it. Thank you.
What time?
9:30. And it's on the back of your order of service. List the next one coming up. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. So I just want to give a plug for the Community Partners Program, which is something that our Outreach Steering Committee has been driving all year. And thanks to everyone's generosity, we are just over $15,000 collected for our 3 community partners, which address critical needs here in Door County of childcare, housing, and the environment. So this is your last chance before our fiscal year closes to make a contribution that goes towards those important partners, and we will be continuing with those partners next year as well. But I just wanted to call out the great success we've had this year and thank everyone for their generosity. Okay, let us now begin our service, and I'll invite Mary Dunworth to light our chalice while I read these words. I Breathe by Craig Rowland. I breathe in the warmth of this light, its glow filling the spaces where fear and doubt reside. I breathe out the tension I carry. I release what no longer serves me. I breathe in the strength of our community, a sanctuary of diverse voices and shared purpose. I breathe out the urge to go it alone. I embrace the power of togetherness. I breathe in the courage to speak truth, even when it trembles on my lips. I breathe out the silence that holds me back. I make space for honesty and justice. I breathe in the hope of transformation, knowing we are here to build and to heal. I breathe out despair, trusting that change is born in small acts of love. As we light this chalice, may each breath remind us of the sacred rhythm of life, the pulse of creation, and the power we hold to shape the world around us. Thank you, Mary. Please join in singing hymn number 298, followed by our unison affirmation and doxology. Please stand if you are able. We gather to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. From all that Now is the time in the service when you may briefly share a joy that fills your heart or a concern that might weigh heavily on you. And keep in mind the service is recorded, so please do not share anything about someone else unless you have their permission to do so. Phil has one.
I had a joy this week that I wanted to share with everybody. I was working here during the week. I don't remember which day. We're working on the gardens out here. By the way, Gwen has done a terrific job. Please thank her for all the work. And her crew. Come on, Gwen. Yeah, it's just amazing. So we're trying to get some sidewalks in, too. So I had walked around the back. I came in the front. The lot was empty except for a convertible red Mazda Miata sports car. And I was like, I didn't know whose it was, and I was the only one here. The building was open, so I went in, and I had the privilege to meet our bookkeeper. And I said, "Is that your car?" She goes, "Actually, it's my mom's. And I drive it in the summer to remember her." I said, "Oh, what's the story?" And she said, "Well, near the end of her life, she was starting to fail. And she told me, 'I want a red sports car.'" And she said, "Really, Mom?" She said, "Well, will it spark joy?" And I love the way she put that. And her mom said, "Yeah, it will spark joy." And she said, "Okay, then get one." So she drove it for about a year, and then she started to fail and then passed. And I just thought that was so cool. If it will spark joy. So in this time of darkness and questioning, when the first thing we do in the morning, get up, put on our cell phones and cringe, if something will spark joy for you, I would say do it. And with that, I'm going to tell my wife I'm getting a boat. No, I'm not really.
Do it. I think Meg had her hand up too.
I used to dread the birthdays. Another one, oh no, and especially the decade ones. Well, tomorrow is another one. And instead of asking, well, how many is it? Don't be rude, don't ask me that. Just wish me happy birthday and give me a hug.
Hi, Jackie Polson here. I'm back up north for the summer, and one of my joys is reading the hard copy of the Peninsula Pulse, Letters to the Editor.
Welcome.
Trish Black, we just returned last night from a whirlwind 12-day trip out to the East Coast. It was a blast. It was fun. We were there to celebrate our daughter's 40th birthday. I don't know how that's possible. I think I'm only 50. But anyway, it was wonderful. But the best part, what her request was that she wanted to hike a 4,000-footer in the White Mountains. And so both of her brothers flew out. We were there. Jim, her husband, they did Mount Pierce. Even the old guy. He outdid the son-in-law, who's not a hiker, and then they chose to go on and do a 4,700-footer Mount Eisenhower. But the best part of it all, well, first off, she said at the end of the day, best birthday ever. And secondly, to see my 3 adult children out there, a shared goal, and actually loving it together. That was my joy.
Beautiful.
Hello. It's Austin. I've got a 2-for-1 deal, a sorrow followed by a joy. This past week, my boyfriend of 3.5 years and I broke up during Pride Month. But it ended by mutual agreement in good faith. And so here's the joy, is that, well, back to the sorrow real quick. Naturally, I cried like hell on the day it happened. But here's the joy now. Since then, I have felt a great sense of relief and freedom and even gratitude that because it ended in good faith, I now, those 3.5 years of lovely memories don't have to be tainted by a bad end. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adrian Murray. Most of you probably knew my mother, Valerie. The little red sports car was hers. So I feel I have her permission to share that.
Wow.
My other joy is Kelly and I spent some time yesterday doing quite a bit of yard work. And for those of you who don't know where, my mom ended up beneath a lovely magnolia plant at the house. And then Toby, her husband, passed before her, is beneath a lovely lilac tree, also at the house. Yesterday, we also planted their dog Max underneath a cold hardy fig tree that we really hope is going to hold. So that's my joy for today.
Hi, I'm Bob Dowling, Adria, and I have some great news to share. Our oldest grandchild, who's a 10-year-old, underwent his fourth and successful open heart surgery a week ago Wednesday. It went very well. He was able to come home that Sunday, and his recovery is proceeding very well. It'll be about 6 weeks before he's healed enough where he can not only walk and move around as he's doing now, but actually run and do many of the much more active things that have become very difficult for him. So we're very pleased with the outcome.
As many of you know, we've been virtually absent for 6 months. Now, the last 4 weeks we plead guilty because we were in Ireland. Before that time, we had a bit of a struggle with Mary's hospitalization, which kind of went on and on and on and on. But she, unexpectedly, she recovered and is recovering. So we looked on our trip to Ireland as the best possible therapeutic thing we could do to help her get back on track. Now, we're well aware of the fact that getting back on track is going to be about a year-long process. But I do want to express again our deep appreciation for the support that you folks gave over a long period of time, and over a long period of time when things weren't looking too good for a while. So again, thank you very much for your support and kindness. We really, really appreciate it, and it did make a difference. It did make a difference.
Did you want to say something? Did you? No. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It is the time for the offertory and a time to remember that this community exists because we care for it together. Your gifts help sustain the work and the shared spirit that brings meaning to what we do here. Let us now give as we are able in the spirit of generosity and gratitude. And if you're visiting for the first time, let your presence be your gift to us. The world is often filled with noise, and silence can feel unfamiliar. It is in the quiet that we hear the most important things, however. As we continue in this sacred hour, let us pause for a moment of silence and enter that stillness together to prepare for today's speaker. Before our speaker begins, I share these words by Bishop Desmond Tutu. I've sometimes joked and said God doesn't know very much math, because when you give to others, it should be that you are subtracting from yourself. But in this incredible kind of way, I've certainly found that to be the case so many times. You give, and then it seems like, in fact, you are making space for more to be given to you. And there is a very physical example. The Dead Sea in the Middle East receives fresh water, but it has no outlet, so it doesn't pass the water out. It receives beautiful water from the rivers, and the water goes dank. It just goes bad, and that's why it is the Dead Sea. It receives and does not give. And we are much the same way too. I mean, we receive and we must give. In the end, generosity is the best way of becoming more and more and more joyful. Brett?
As some of you may know, 30 years ago, it was 30 years ago, that I moved from Hawaii to live with my lovely bride, who's been together now for some 30 years. And I have to say, as you can imagine, I have the opportunity to talk to lots of different groups of people, both professionally as well as some of the things I do with our church. And without a doubt, since I have left the state of Hawaii, I don't think I have been in a room in which I have spoken to a crowd with more colorful shirts and dresses than you can possibly imagine, the aloha shirts and the like. I want to call out Dick in particular, because Dick is wearing a Tori Richard. If you grow up in Hawaii, you can spot a Tori Richard aloha shirt. And Linda Bliss has got the flower behind her ear. If you're not clear, in Hawaii, right ear, that means you're available. So just saying, don't want to, you want to put it on the other ear there if you want to make that clear to people in the room. So, now my father, Bernaldo Daniel Bicoy, was exactly 47 years and 5 days old when I was born. While few of my childhood friends ever gave any thought about the age of their father, it was never far from my mind. When I was in elementary school, most of my friends' dads were in their early 20s or their early 30s or their late 20s, while my father was well into his 50s. At a time when other kids' parents were a product of the 60s counterculture, my dad came from an earlier generation. He wore a three-piece suit every day, listened to Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey on his 8-track tape machine. In other words, my dad stuck out like a sore thumb among all of the parents of my friends. My father's birthday is just 5 days before mine, so he turned 65 just a few days before I turned 18. So I can still remember clearly that day standing at the kitchen counter in which my father was opening the envelope containing his very first Social Security check. My father was always an old man to me. Yet, in some sort of odd contradiction, as old as I knew my father was, I never seemed to consider that he had lived nearly half a century before I was born. Yes, he seemed old, but the arrogance of my youth led me to conclude that obviously nothing of consequence could have occurred before I arrived on the scene. As a child, I didn't like that my father was so much older than the other fathers. During my most formative years, he was at the peak of his professional success, and that left precious little time for family. Further, Dad had been married several times, and thus his attention was necessarily divided. In later years, I would jokingly begin phone calls to him by saying, hey, Dad, this is child number 2 from wife number 3. And I got my brothers and sisters to do the same. This is child number 1 from wife number 2, or whatever it was. We all got a good laugh as Dad was trying to figure out who was actually on the other end of the call. Now, I have no memory of throwing a ball or riding a bike or going camping with my father. I can recall only one occasion when we went to the ball game together. We didn't do the things together that the younger fathers did with their sons. When I was young, I saw that as his failing. Perhaps I still do. Yet, as I pass the age now that I am, older than he was when I was born, I have begun to appreciate the incredible gift I was blessed to receive precisely because Dad had lived half a century before I entered his life. The Franciscan friar Richard Rohr wrote a wonderful little book about a transition in life that we all make, or hopefully we will all make. It's called Falling Upward, a spirituality for the two halves of life. It explores how most of us spend the first half of our existence focused on our career and our individual selves. Yet the best among us eventually make the transition to using our remaining time on earth to building a meaningful life. Unlike the younger parents of most of my peers, when I was a boy, my father was most certainly in the second half of his life. When I was 10 years old, my father was 57, professionally successful, and no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone. Rohr writes that people who have successfully made the transition to the second half of life think to themselves, quote, I no longer have to prove that I or my group is the best, that my ethnicity is superior, that my religion is the only one that God loves, or that my role and place in society deserves superior treatment. I'm not preoccupied with collecting more goods and services. Quite simply, my desire and effort every day is to pay back, to give back to the world a bit of what I have received. I now realize that I have been gratuitously given to from the universe, from society, and from God. I try now, as Elizabeth Seton said, to live simply so that others can simply live. Imagine what a gift it is growing up with a father whose age and wisdom has given him this kind of perspective on the world. Rohr writes that people who have successfully transitioned to the second half of life no longer feel the need to change or adjust other people to be happy themselves. But ironically, because of the success they've enjoyed in the first half of their life, they are more than ever before in a position to change people. But they don't feel the need to do so. And that makes all the difference. Rohr says these kinds of wise souls do what they are called to do and then try to let go of the consequences. That's not something we can do very well when we are young and trying to prove ourselves. Rohr writes, those who've made the successful transition to the second half of life aid and influence people simply by being who they are. Human integrity probably moves and influences people from potency to action more than anything else. For most of the first half of my life, I absolutely did not want to be like my father. I did not want to be 47 years and 5 days old holding a brand new baby. I wanted to be a young father with time to spare and energy to share. I'm happy that Carrie and I had all 6 of our 6 children by the time I was 32 years old. We were really busy there for a while. You know, with all of that, though, in some ways, I wish I could have been more like my dad when I was a young father. Unquestionably, as a boy, I was a beneficiary of the wisdom that he had developed by the second half of his life. When my father was my age now, I was just a little kid, following him around, listening to every word that came out of his mouth. Today, the youngest of our 6 children is a senior in college, and needless to say, she doesn't listen a whole lot to the things that I have to say anymore. There are simply things about life that I understand now that I was too young and naive to know when my children were little kids still following me around. And therein is my father's greatest gift to me. He was old enough and experienced enough and wise enough to share lessons with me about how to live a full and generous life. So in recognition of the Father's Day that we just celebrated, I'd like to share with you some of the lessons I learned from the man who taught me about generosity. Now, I've written about these before in the Pulse and the Advocate, and I've talked about them in other contexts, so I apologize if you've heard them before. But I think it's important that we celebrate and remember what generosity means and all of the different facets that make it so important to our lives. Now, when we think about generosity, we immediately think about donations of money, and that's certainly a part of it. My father did his share of writing checks. But generosity comes in many forms, and my father exhibited them all. While Dad was never one to sit down with me and offer a formal lesson, as I look back on my childhood, I realize now that all I learned and all I know about generosity came from watching how that man chose to live his life. Lesson number 1 from my father: be generous with your friendship. My father served in World War II in Korea. He was an 18-year-old ROTC student at the University of Hawaii in 1941. On December 7th, he watched the bombing of Pearl Harbor from the roof of his building, and by noon that day, they inducted him as a private in the United States Army. And he spent that evening standing a post on Waikiki Beach, waiting for the invasion from Japan that never came. My father would go on to serve in Germany and was later recalled to active duty to serve in Korea. He entered the Army as a private on that December 7th day and retired as a lieutenant colonel decades later, long before I was ever born. Dad was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart because he unhesitatingly put himself at risk to aid his fellow soldiers and his friends. That unhesitating willingness to help a friend was a pattern that continued throughout his entire life. He was always generous with his friendship. If you ever needed anything at all, you only need ask. If it was in his power to grant it to you, you knew that it would be yours. Dad thought if you could do something to help a friend, you should. To my father, it really isn't any more complicated than that. Lesson number 2 from my father: be generous with your time. During a period when Filipinos were considered second-class citizens in Hawaii, my father literally created the first community-wide Filipino organization, the United Filipino Council of Hawaii. Before statehood came in 1959, my father served in the last territorial legislature. He was at Hawaii's Constitutional Convention and helped write the founding documents of the new state of Hawaii. Dad was always generous with his time. He gave of his time to serve on more boards and committees and commissions and civic groups than you could possibly imagine. My dad strongly believed that the only way for a community to truly thrive is if each of us gave of our time to that community. He said that if each of us gave what we could, then the whole would be stronger. Lesson number 3 from my father: be generous with your labor. On any given day, the trunk of Dad's car was filled with papayas and coconuts and fish and lobster because you never knew what he was going to bring home from the office. Nearly 3/4 of a century ago, Dad was one of the first, and certainly the most prominent, Filipino attorney in Hawaii. So all of the immigrants would come to him with every legal issue you could imagine. And as you might expect, Many of them didn't have the money to pay his fees. But Dad would help him anyway, and they would pay him in whatever it was they had of value to offer. And that's why he would come home with papayas and coconuts and fish and lobster. That's why this old Filipino man showed up outside our door one day completely unannounced and said he was going to paint our house. It's why another would bring fresh duck every Thursday. It's why a taxi cab driver insisted on driving us to the airport every time we were going to fly to visit family on the island of Molokai. And on Molokai, some 30 years after my dad retired, he would still walk into Oviedo's restaurant, barge into the kitchen, open up the roasters, and just help himself to the lechon, which is a Filipino roast pork. And Mr. and Mrs. Oviedo would laugh about it because they were so thankful of when my dad helped them with a legal problem decades before when they couldn't afford to pay him. What my father gave up in income by being generous with his labor was returned to him tenfold in the form of gratitude and friendship of others. Lesson number 4 from my father: be generous with your respect. Dad treated everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life. My father was the child of illiterate, illegal immigrants, and I use the term illegal immigrant deliberately because Grandpa was not an undocumented worker. Grandpa had documents, they just happened to be fake documents. My father came from as humble a beginning as you could imagine. At one point in his young life, Dad literally lived in a cave on the island of Molokai because his parents could afford nothing else. Perhaps that's why, even after he achieved a high degree of professional success, he still demonstrated so much respect for the blue-collar folks who truly worked hard for a living. When I would go to his office with him in downtown Honolulu, it was clear that he knew the names of not only every parking attendant, cleaning crew worker, and service worker. He treated each of them with a level of respect they were unaccustomed to receiving from a prominent man who wore a 3-piece suit every day. The funny thing is, it wouldn't have occurred to my father to treat them any other way, and they loved him for it. Lesson number 5 from my father: be generous with your love. My father was the eldest of 12 children. We're amateurs with 6 in comparison. He took that responsibility very seriously. Shortly before his own father died, my grandfather, Petronillo, told my father that he was now responsible for his brothers and sisters. Dad expressed his love for family by always being at the ready whenever anyone had a problem. His siblings would constantly seek him out for advice and guidance. His nieces and nephews would ask for help on all sorts of issues, both legal and otherwise, and Dad never failed to answer the call. To my father, accepting the mantle of responsibility for those you love is the ultimate way of being generous with that love. Now, of course, like all of us, my father had his failings. He was perhaps a little too proud and too unwilling to be demonstrative with his love. Yet Dad was loved by so many when the end finally came. And that's why I know the lessons of my father are universal. I grew up Catholic, so forgive my references to the saints, but Dad taught me that being generous does not require us to have the faith of St. Peter or the selflessness of St. Damien. Being generous is a choice. It's a deliberate decision to share of ourselves with others without any expectation of compensation. At some point, as a boy growing up on Molokai, my father decided to lead a life of generosity, and he was beloved because of it. It really is just as simple as that. Yet, of all the things I learned about generosity from my father when I was a boy, there's one lesson that I did not learn until many years after his passing. In Dad's office when I was a kid was this little wooden plaque on the wall, engraved with the Serenity Prayer, It was composed by the famous theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. You've probably all heard bits and pieces of it in the past. It goes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, accepting one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking, as he did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. That my father would put a copy of the Serenity Prayer on the wall seemed incongruous to me, because he also had his favorite poem up on the wall. It's entitled, Don't Quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of clouds of doubt. And you can never tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit. Don't Quit is a poem about defiance. It's about refusing to give in or give up despite the overwhelming odds against you. How does one reconcile the Serenity Prayer, a prayer about accepting that which you cannot change, with Don't Quit, a poem about stubborn perseverance in the face of overwhelming obstacles? Now, since I was a boy, I always liked the poem better than the prayer. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. For much of my adult life, I had great difficulty accepting the idea behind the Serenity Prayer, which of course my wife finds horribly amusing. I have a hard time accepting a prayer about acceptance. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I deeply value wisdom, which is what we ask God to grant us in the Serenity Prayer. And I have great respect for those with courage, which is what we pray for God to grant us in the Serenity Prayer. But to simply give in, to acquiesce, to settle for being passive spectators is to accept things as they are, as if that is the way they are destined to be. I have always believed that I should be willing to act upon my convictions even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. By only refusing to accept the unacceptable will we broaden the human horizon that defines the change which is possible. Though my hair is now overwhelmingly gray, I find that I am still learning from my father. I finally recognize that my own discomfort with the Serenity Prayer was born out of my own misunderstanding. I wrongly read the Serenity Prayer as a gospel of resignation. The essayist Paul Loeb reminds us that the wisdom to know the difference between that which we can change and that which we must accept, the wisdom that is talked about in the Serenity Prayer, that wisdom is born from action. For the only way to find what change is possible is through our deeds. Wisdom does not simply alight upon us. Wisdom is accumulated through a lifetime of effort trying to bring change to our world. The truth is that to read the future as already determined, be it implacable darkness or rosy dawn, is to give up on precisely that which can make the greatest difference, giving our all to the present. What my father was teaching me, what he is still teaching me, is that life is not like navigating through an open field. A life well lived calls you to commit yourself to a few of the institutions that were embedded in the ground before you were born and will be here after you die. It is accepting the gifts of those who came before us, taking on the responsibility of preserving and improving those institutions, and then passing those institutions on as gifts to the next generation. And since we never know when one of our seemingly modest acts might help change history or inspire someone else who will play a key role, we do well to savor both the journey of engagement in self and the everyday grace that we can draw along the way. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. Rather, hope is the certainty that some things just make sense, regardless of how they turn out. So let me finish by going beyond the Serenity Prayer and quote instead from another of Reinhold Niebuhr's prayers. Nothing that is worth doing can be achieved in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing which is true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in the immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love. My friends, as my father would say, this is the community we love. We have been blessed by the abundance provided to us by those who came before us. We are now entrusted with the stewardship of the community we have among us, and we are being given the opportunity to be generous and nurture a better future as a gift to those who will follow us. As my father taught me, generosity is a choice. If you are willing and able, please stand and join in the singing of hymn number 317, We Are Not Our Own.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Sandy, for making our service special today. And as we come to the close of our time together this morning, I invite you to carry with you the spirit of this hour. And remember, a candle loses nothing by lighting another flame. Thank you for being here. We will regroup after you have a chance to grab some coffee. I think the chimes will ring. I think that's what it says in here. Something will tell you to come back in here for the annual meeting. And I invite Mary to come up here and extinguish our chalice.